Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are covering the full book of Micah. So if you are curious why we are doing that, Micah was a prophet primarily in Judah. However, he is prophesying against Judah and Israel during Jotham's reign. So we just read a little bit about Jotham the other day, and now we have Micah on the scene prophesying to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom starting around 740, 742-ish BC. So we have Amos, which we read a couple days ago. He starts prophesying in 760. We've been reading bits and pieces of Isaiah, who starts around 740. And now we're reading the full text of Micah today, who starts in 742. So a lot of these prophets are contemporaries of each other. They know each other. They understand the messages of each other. And their messages are very similar. In fact, there's parts of Micah that sound almost identical to parts of Isaiah. And so just to give you a little bit of background of why we're reading Micah today, and a little bit of the background of what's going on that day. Again, like the exile is coming. If Micah is prophesying in 742, that means the northern kingdom of Israel is going to be carried into exile by the Assyrians in just 20 years. So it's pretty short in the grand scheme of what we've been reading. And then the southern kingdom of Judah is carried off into exile in 586, so a little bit later. But a lot of these things that are being prophesied do in fact come true.
Yeah, so as we're going through Micah, I noticed that there's definite mention of what the judgment is for, as well as like little glimmers of hope as far as their eventual, I guess, saving from said exile. But in our study Bibles, it talks a little bit about specific sins that they will be judged for. And what they are, they include idolatry, which we have seen many times, the seizure of property, the failure of civil leadership, religious leadership, which is one that I picked up on. I was like, ooh, that's like hard. Prophetic leadership, which is also just like, it gets kind of sticky and gross, the fact that was even an issue. And then finally, sacrificing without repentance or without true repentance. And then corrupt business practices and violence. So these are all things that Micah brings up throughout the chapters. But I did notice, like, in between, because like in previous prophetic books, it's been like, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be terrible, terrible, terrible. And then there's like a paragraph of, don't worry, there's going to be some kind of redemption for you. But throughout these chapters, I noticed that like there's actually like a bit of like hope, glimmers of hope sprinkled here and there. And like some in chapter 5 and some in chapter 4. And then there's more at the end in chapter 7. So like, I don't know, maybe he was like a little bit more of a soft prophet. There's
definitely a little bit more grace and restoration weaved in to kind of the condemnation that he is speaking. It's kind of interesting to put yourself in, I almost said Amos. It's interesting to put yourself in Micah's shoes. These guys would have been incredibly unpopular. They are not preaching the kinds of things that people want to enjoy hearing. If you want to be a successful, well-respected prophet, you should not be prophesying the things that these guys are saying. And you can see, actually, just to speak to some of the moral decay, you can see part of that explained in chapter 2. So chapter 2, verse 11 says, "If a man should go about and utter wind and lies, saying, I will preach to you of wine and strong drink, he would be the preacher for this people." So he's basically, what Micah is saying is like, you people enjoy hearing preaching about you getting more things and enjoying more life. You overindulging, like experiencing too much. Like it's a lot of prosperity kind of stuff. And basically Micah is saying, hey, that is not my message to you. And the people that are preaching prosperity to you, they are giving you wind and lies.
Well, and to kind of piggyback off of that, in chapter 3, we have similar talks of prophecy. And like being a prophet in those days, it was not, like you were saying, it wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't like, a sought after thing when you are speaking on behalf of God, because like people didn't want to hear what you had to say. However, there were many false prophets. Verse 5 in chapter 3 alludes to this. There were many false prophets who would just basically, they would be seeking money from others, who in turn would just want to hear what they wanted to actually hear anyway. So it was like, pay somebody that says they're a prophet to tell me what I want to hear. People did that. So again, kind of like that same idea as what Amos was saying, like, hey, this is not what I was hoping to do with my life. I was simply enjoying what I was up to, and this is what God told me I had to say, take it or leave it.
So chapter 3 actually is the center of a lot of the charges. He starts out first confronting the rulers and leaders of Israel. This would have been like the actual kings and members of the king's leadership. Hear you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, you hate good and love evil. Mm-hmm. Basically, like, your passions are completely in the wrong place. Then he goes to talk about what you just said, the prophets, because the prophets are leading the people astray. And actually, what's interesting about the prophets, as he says, it will be night for you without vision and darkness to you without divination. Like, you are lying to the people. Mm-hmm. And so God is not going to appear to you, and God is not going to lead you. You're not going to hear from the Lord because your heart is just misleading God's people.
Sorry.
And then finally, I would say also in verse 9, hear this, you heads of the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, who detest justice and make crooked all that is straight, who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. Like, there was a huge problem just with like the social justice nature of leadership. The leadership of Israel and Judah was basically like enriching themselves at the expense of the people that they were supposed to be leading as shepherds. But rather than being shepherds, they're thieves, basically. They're just like greedy people that are looking out for themselves. And Micah is charging them for sure.
So then we move into chapter 4 and 5. And at the tail end of chapter 4, we start seeing a little bit more of this like glimmer of hope for those taken off into exile. So chapter 4 verses 6 through chapter 5 verse about 1, there's talk of, hey, like, there's a lot of distress, there's a lot of scary bad things that come out of being exiled, but at the same time there is salvation. They will see like the light at the end of the tunnel. But then as we move into the rest of chapter 5, there's like this ultimate, what did you call it? Ultimate restoration through the coming of the Messiah, who is Jesus, which is pretty cool. We're seeing that again in the Old Testament in Micah.
It actually says explicitly in chapter 5, but you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient of days. And even in Jesus' time, they understood, the rabbis understood that Micah 5 was speaking of the Messiah coming from Bethlehem, mm-hmm. which is why Matthew spends a lot of time talking about Jesus coming from Bethlehem. And this is the city of David, Bethlehem, but ultimately it's the city of the Messiah. So we have covered, I think, in every one of these prophetic books, some allusion to the fact that this greater leader is coming. And there have already been many specifics, and so you can just add this to one more specific that's listed.
I feel kind of bad. I should have said this earlier, but I'm going to say it now because we've been talking about it enough and we forgot to mention it this episode. At the beginning of Micah in chapter 1, this is just kind of like fun fact, cool thing. In chapter 1, verse 3, for behold, the Lord is coming out of his place. Okay, this is the coming destruction. This is the coming exile. And will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. Oh. Okay, we're finally seeing those high places like being prophesied that they will completely come down. So those high places that the kings never took care of, they're finally seeing their end.
They've been a huge snag to everybody.
Yes, sorry, I felt like we should mention that because that's just been a thing we've been reading about. All these stupid kings that never got rid of it. God's going to do it.
So I think one final thought here, Micah 6. Micah 6, really starting in verse 6 up to verse 8, is probably one of my favorite passages in the Bible. Just because I like the imagery. Basically what God is saying, or what the prophet is issuing, is like, what does the Lord want from you? Does he want 10,000 rams to be sacrificed? Does he want 10,000 rivers of oil to be offered? Like, no, he doesn't want all these things. Micah 6:8 says, he has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? So basically, we have talked about how the people have moved their hearts away from God. They were not doing justice. They were taking advantage of the people. They were not kind. They were quite shrewd, and they certainly were not walking humbly with their God. They were walking with every other single god they could find. But they continued to offer sacrifices in like large measure. They were constantly offering up, whatever sacrifices and offerings they were supposed to, but their hearts had moved from the Lord. So I think that Micah does a great job of showing that God is not pleased with our empty religious rituals. He is very pleased when we honor him with our lives. And so this is not something that just existed in Micah's day and then went away. Like, we honor the Lord with honoring God in every aspect of our lives. Paul goes on to say that we are a living sacrifice pleasing to him. When we order our lives as a living sacrifice, we honor the Lord. And it's not by our empty rituals that the Lord is ultimately honored. So I love that little passage. I think it's fantastic. I think it's really applicable to today.
Mm-hmm. And I would just say, as we kind of end out the book, because the book is all a part of this, chapter 7 in verses 18 through 20 kind of pulls together Micah's idea of, or not even idea, he's describing God as, remember, this is in the Old Testament, he's describing God as forgiving, compassionate, faithful, loving. And what really this is mirroring, because again, at the end, he talks about the faithfulness that he has shown, as you have sworn to your fathers from the days of old about this remnant that's coming. He is going to be Jesus, who is going to be the living embodiment of those characteristics of God. So it's like this really cool tie-in of Micah prophesying about Jesus, of all of these awesome characteristics that God also has, but it's going to come in the form of Jesus, like walking among us. So cool.
So this is just one more instance, guys, of Jesus being so explicitly described in very old literature. Again, this is probably 740 BC, something like that. So 700 years before Jesus, there's a very clear picture of who he is, what he's going to do, where he's going to be born. That is faith affirming to us. These are real things that were fulfilled, and we know they were fulfilled. I think probably for your part, I would really encourage you to take some time to look at Micah 6 through 8. We don't honor the Lord with rivers of oil and blood of rams and bulls and all that kind of stuff. But I love the picture that it shows of God is not honored by empty ritual. God is honored by committing your life to him and to his ways. And so the best your part I have to come up with today is just to commit your life to God's ways. How do you do that? You walk in relationship with him. You evaluate your decisions according to what he would ask and he would desire. And you just walk humbly with your God. I hope that you continue to walk humbly with God, as it says in Micah 6. So we'll be back again tomorrow. Tomorrow we are jumping into 2 Chronicles 28 and 2 Kings 16 and 17. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.